I'm here to the home of the Swelling champion and Ferrari's biggest fan, and of course Ferrari's biggest tifosi. So we are going to go here to the exclusive race reaction to round 16 of the 2025 Formula 1 World Championship, obviously, which happens to be the 75th season of the Formula 1 World Championship and the 75th running of the Italian Grand Prix, which bar 1 year was ever present at the Autodromo Nazionale Monza, obviously. After Indianapolis, it is the oldest track, of course, on the European continent, the second oldest, in the world, and once again, it served up an amazing race, and, we came within a whisker of celebrating with all the tifosi who, of course, line up, as the race then finished, all across the main straight and all around the Parabolica, and we will tell you, actually how close, even though the result might not reflected how close we came to lifting this beautiful Formula 1 Grand Prix winner trophy. We will also tell you a little bit about, that winning trophy, which of course you probably, notice it was all silver, right? What exactly the drivers were competing for, because it is actually a great masterpiece, so one of the, these classic, Formula 1 trophies. And we will, take a look at how the race finished, obviously, how our drivers fared, how maybe they should have done, better at certain stages of the Grand Prix and of the race as they were driving with the SF1000T in 1.8 Formula 1 Racing Simulator for the second time in Italy, and now at our proper home, sweet home, of course, the home of the Tifosi, the Temple of Speed, which has seen, the fastest records, of Formula 1, several of them, in fact, shattered this weekend, and it's just a pity that, it won't be with, obviously, the Scuderia Ferrari's name, but, I'm sure we will come back very stronger and in the future, and then we will show you on the Scuderia Red Retina iMac how, of course, exactly the race finished, and what it means for the drivers in the Constructors' Championship, and where that leaves us after the second third of the season. It's really flying past very quickly, and I have to say that we started very well with the free practice one. We placed it on the top, with Lewis Hamilton, of course, and we were competitive through free practice 2 and free practice 3. Then with qualifying 1, again, after the first runs, we were, first and second, and everything looked pretty good. And obviously, we've seen, as we are coming to the end of the ground effect era, one of the shortest, one of the tightest, I would say, tightest contested qualifying sessions in the Formula 1 history, because what you actually had, was the difference between the first and the last driver being not just less than a second, but being mere 0.69 seconds. So, that just shows you just how competitive that qualifying is, even though, of course, in the race, there was still a spread in terms of, how well, for example, the teams and the drivers did. So, qualifying 1, we did well, qualifying 2, as well, but you could already see that you had the different drivers popping up. Qualifying 3, the first runs, we did very well. Second and fourth, obviously, Lewis Hamilton carrying that very harsh penalty for speeding, on the double wave yellows before he even got into the grid in Zandvoort for the Dutch Grand Prix. That was very weird, very, I would say, subjective penalty. But nevertheless, it dropped him 5 places. So being fourth, he would start 9th, right? There were some kind of a team games. Would he help Charles maybe with a toe or something? But it was decided not to, because if he has gotten a pole position, he would start 6th, and from there on, obviously, he would have a chance to win as well. And the last run in the qualifying 3 was very important, because believe it or not, pretty much the top 4, and if you go really down, pretty much the top 6, because obviously with Hamilton's penalty, then finished, in the same order, surprisingly, even though, there was a lot of drama in the race, of course, as you can imagine. So, what happened was that, we went out relatively early in that qualifying 3, and the drivers behind, they were either able to, get a tow, maybe there was a bit more of a rubber, obviously, laid in, which is very important when you go through some of the chicanes, and especially through Lesmos or the Ascari chicane, right, to have as much grip as possible. And what happened was that, pretty much in the first, turn, right, breaking into that first chicane, both Charles and Lewis obviously, were 110 down, and they were not able to improve, right? So, we were in a very, very, tight fight, obviously, there with Verstappen for a pole position. Then, in the end, the orange McLarens jumped us. Verstappen improved a little bit more to set the overall, fastest time. That was that first kind of the fastest record that I told you about, right? That was shattered with 118.7. Obviously, I would be only a couple of tenths shy, in that botched qualifying that you've probably seen for my very own 2024 Italian race. Lando Norris, came very close to him, Oscar Piastri as well within a 10. Leclerc was, just 119, almost flat. So, great result. Lewis just 110 down. So, everything to play for. It was quite equal, but obviously Hamilton had to drop to 10th position. And, there you had it at the start. Surprise Red Bull. The two, obviously, McLaren title contenders with the home hero Charles and Lewis trying to, make his way from the 10th. And, the start, I think Leclerc got a good start, but most of the drivers actually got a pretty similar start. But you could immediately see, as obviously the beautiful, brilliant sunshine with the blue sky has illuminated this, temple of the speed in its greatest colors. Looks really beautiful, even without the trees. Monza is set actually in the Royal Park, of course, on the outskirts of Milan, and it looks, brilliant. Obviously looks better, if there are more trees, but as a result, you get to see more of action without these traditional, for example, the shadows. But as obviously all the tifosi were, flying the flags, and as, the 3 p.m., mark on the tag here, which obviously, has turned sharp, we went for a formation light, then the 5 lights went out, and the Italian Grand Prix is the one that, obviously now, for the first time I also haven't won, finish only 7th because I received so many penalties, but, I've always done ever so well here, pretty much when I finish, I was still 3rd, right? So always being on a podium, I have to say it's one of the most enjoyable races, and you could see especially at the beginning, that the drivers were quite aggressive with each other, so they've gotten almost an identical start. But I would say Verstappen, the reigning champion, has gotten probably the worst start of them all. Norris did a good job, Piastri taking, and great job by Leclerc to getting ahead of, Piastri, and what a pity that, Norris, who actually went a little bit on the grass, and, that was really dirty driving, I have to say, from the Red Bull driver, who just kept his line, but knowingly knew that Norris was there and tried to run him off the road a little bit like Suzuka, kind of playing the games with him and then cutting the corners. What a pity that Norris didn't collect him, because I thought that would be a great chance, for us, if we could either qualify on the pole position, or if we would be able to actually get ahead, during, through that first chicane, unscathed and ahead of, the fighting duo of Verstappen and Norris. That was our best chance, because we had one of the best, if not the best, top speed, and as a result, obviously, we probably would have been able to keep, the position, especially if Leclerc was running ahead of, for example, Verstappen or Norris. So, as it went, Verstappen cut the corner, had to give a position to Norris, and they started to tussle for a lead. The issue was with the championship leader Piastri, because obviously Leclerc overtook him, but Piastri was very tough with him, overtook him around the outside of the second Lesmo, where accidentally, or coincidentally, I of course crashed, as you probably seen, amazing race that I've done, and I was still able, of course, to recover. I just lost the, bit of a front wing, but incredibly, because of that infighting, we lost the DRS, right? It is very, very powerful, because, obviously there are several zones, not just, the one main zone. And as a result, because of that, it was always a fight between, Charles and, the championship leader Piastri. And, at the end of, I believe, the lap 5, Leclerc didn't get a great, exit out of the Parabolica, and Piastri then went to the outside and, had the full car's length, ahead of Leclerc. Then obviously you had Hamilton making great moves right at the start. After the first lap, he was 8th, right? Great move, obviously, on, Bortoleto and Alonso, before that, obviously, his old nemesis. So, he's made his way up to 6th, but was unable to actually, get close to the Russell, who was actually running Leclerc quite close. But then, what happened was that the distances, they slowly, basically, all the drivers kind of, they were running in unison, right? So you had the top 2 fighting, and then from the third place from Leclerc down, basically there would always be kind of I found it very interesting, the kind of even split, right? Of always couple of seconds, from, for example, Piastri to Leclerc, then Leclerc to Russell, Russell to Hamilton, and you could see, with basically only one pit stop, and basically the undercut not being very, very powerful, right? The only overtake in the pits was really that way, where, for example, you did have you did have that big fight house, obviously. Here it all restarted by itself. When you had Alonso, brilliantly overtaking, the driver. He's the manager of the reigning F2 champion Bortolotto in the pits. Really attacking that pit lane. Entry. Really hard. They didn't have much of the true overtakes for a position. Once the race settled, Leclerc was a bit lucky. Obviously, he also attacked, that pit entry, quite hard, and thankfully, he didn't get a penalty for that. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a pity that at the start, we lost contact with the fighting duo. Obviously, Verstappen then dispatched Norris relatively easily, and was able to build up the gap, right? And after, for example, 30 laps, you had 5-6 seconds, Verstappen to Norris, then Norris to Piastri, same to Leclerc, and so on. And the race kind of settled there. So, bit of an anticlimax, I have to say, and it was all pretty much about, the qualifying. I believe without the penalty also for Hamilton, if he would have qualified 1 and 2, or at least held 1 and 2 after the first lap, he could, for example, definitely play a team game, a little bit like what happened in 2023, in that 2023 season, when we were able to, to keep Verstappen, for example, behind really well with Sainz and Leclerc. But here we didn't have a track position. We clearly went for a low downforce, and as a result, because of that, we were kind of powerless, to protect, right, from some of the attacks, for example, we were basically unable, to bridge the gap, and, if, like, out of the Parabolica, once the Piastri has gotten a really good exit, it was still a bit difficult, to defend. So, the track position was quite important. I was really surprised that Red Bull actually went on to win the race, but yeah, overall, again, I really appreciate, what the fans did. We obviously had a, bit of a interesting, mess up in the McLaren pits, right? You might be thinking, look, are they influencing the championship, right? When you have, for example, Piastri being asked to give a position to Norris because they screw up his pit stop. But, actually, I think it's, all nice and fair. And what a pity, that maybe Leclerc wasn't closer, to capitalize on that, because, again, he was just, a couple of seconds, away from Piastri. So, that was a really good result, but clearly that Red Bull running away at the front, that was a surprise, and, the one that ultimately, cost us the win, because we should have planted it on pole position. We should have, led the race, and obviously made that pit stop probably from mediums to hards. You could see some interesting strategies, medium to soft, which is what I would, for example, prefer, even though it's not what I actually did in a race, where I did medium, hard, medium. Obviously, we had a safety car. And yeah, as then the race, drew to a close, we can probably show you how it finished, because another 2 records after the record pole position time, another 2 records sadly were shattered. One of them, Michael Schumacher's record. So let's take a look at it over here. Okay, so we will turn around this bit of a Scuderia Red Retina iMac. And I hope, you can see everything very nice and clear over here. It will be very difficult for me to see it. Okay, so let's push it down. So yeah, over here. So Verstappen winning for the 3rd time, and, claiming both of the victories on Italian soil. I'm sure Charles or Lewis would have loved that. But look at that winning time, 1 hour, 13 minutes, 24.325 seconds. That's actually beaten the 2003 Italian Grand Prix won by my childhood hero, Michael Schumacher. That stood, that was almost beaten last year by Leclerc's brilliant 2nd victory at Monza. And this is now the fastest ever, in terms of the average speed, the fastest ever Formula 1 race, right? That ran the whole distance, and in terms of the average speed. So that was shattered, Yeah, a little bit, just like for example, a little bit you had that ultimate, lap record, the race record over here that was held by Rubens Barrichello from 2004. 1 minute 21.0 was shattered by Norris, who has picked up the fastest lap time for 1 minute 20.9 and finished second, to close down the gap, at the top of the championship by 3 points after his mishap, obviously, in Zandvoort, the Dutch Grand Prix. Charles Leclerc finishing fourth. I was kind of surprised why, for example, Vasseur, obviously the Ferrari team principal, and even with Leclerc, so we're saying, yeah, that's not a bad position to start. I mean, clearly, you won't be 2 times lucky, winning from the fourth on a grid, and I think it proved out to be the case, right? Because if Leclerc was second with the poor start that Verstappen has gotten, he could have been in the lead, and I believe that he had a pace to qualify second. So yeah, again, another missed opportunity. Solid race, but we don't always want to be finishing fourth, sixth, fifth, sixth, third, fourth. We are here to win. Fifth, then George Russell, obviously, he then dropped from Leclerc. Sixth, Lewis Hamilton, good recovery, but still sixth place, will be a bit bittersweet. It would have been great if he was able to overtake Russell, but he was sadly never able to attack him. Seventh, then Alexander Albon did a good job, getting through after tough qualifying, but once again, his teammate Carlos Sainz, the former Ferrari driver, didn't do that well there, right? 8, Gabriel Bortoleto keeping up a great run of form over here. He is really coming up really well of late. 9, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, the home hero, driving for Mercedes. 2 points. He will be, I guess, a bit disappointed with that, but at least looks like he has gotten back on track, has a solid race under his belt. That will be good for his confidence. And Isaac Hadjar riding high on that confidence after getting on a podium in Zandvoort, scoring a point there. And obviously Verstappen winning for Red Bull. So yeah, what does it mean for the Drivers' Championship? So here is the 2025 Formula 1 Drivers' Championship, and we can see obviously Oscar Piastri leading with 324 points, and you do have 31 points then to Lando Norris, who has 291 points. Second place, really a big fight, between them. You can see, Verstappen, despite, some of his dirty driving, in the end, the McLaren had a clear pace advantage. We have to, admit that, which is a real pity. He's now on 230 points and at least less than 100 points behind, but can he challenge for a championship? Seems highly unlikely, of course. For George Russell, Mercedes, after the 2/3 of the season, he's on 194 points. Charles Leclerc for Scuderia Ferrari, 5th, 163 points. Made up few points, but I think we have to be, honest over here. For the final third of the season, 4th, 3rd, is probably the best we can really do. 6, Lewis Hamilton now for Scuderia Ferrari, 117 points. Looks like, Hamilton will finish 6th. 7, Alexander Albon Williams, 70 points. 8, Andrea Kimi Antonelli Mercedes, 66 points. So despite finishing in the points, he lost the position here to Albon. And 9, of course, Isaac Hadjar for Racing Bulls, 38 points, and 10 is Nico Hülkenberg for Kick Sauber, 37 points. 11 is the Lance Stroll Aston Martin, 32 points. Very unlucky, Fernando Alonso Aston Martin, 12th position, 30 points. That Ascari chicane, I think that's the part of the circuit that I've improved at the most. He has actually broken his right suspension going over the outside of the Ascari chicane. So that just shows you just how much power, just how much force there is generated by the Formula 1 cars. I think he couldn't believe it, because we often in a simulator we often take that vital line coming out of the Ascari, but in a real life, that can cost you the suspension and cost you the chance to finally be ahead of his kind of a daddy paying, the F1 Drive teammate. 13, then Esteban Ocon for Haas, 28 points. 14, Pierre Gasly Alpine, 20 points. 15, Liam Lawson Racing Bulls for 20 points. 16, Gabriel Bortoleto, look at that, Kick Sauber, 18 points. He is really on an upward trajectory, and can he catch Hülkenberg? I really doubt it, but these are really encouraging performances. Over here 17, Oliver Berman, of course, has 16 points, and then we have 18, Carlos Sainz Williams 16 points. You know, this is a terrible season. And Yuki Tsunoda is now 19 for Red Bull Racing, 12 points. I mean, he's kind of getting dropped. If there was no Franco Colapinto for Alpine with 0 points, and obviously Jack Ruhan only contested 6 races for Alpine at 0 points. I mean, finishing last in the standing for Red Bull when Red Bull is beating McLaren's, you know, by almost half a minute, well, 20 seconds. That was quite impressive. I mean, surely Tsunoda, what is he doing at Red Bull, right? So over here, you know, quite interesting. The championship kind of stays, you know, as it was. So that was the Drivers' Championship. Here is the Constructors' Championship. And incredibly, McLaren with that orange fashion winning or leading with 617 points. But after the next race reaction in Azerbaijan, you know, we are Scuderia Ferrari, we are second on 280 points, which means that we are 337 points behind. And if we are, I think, 342 or 3 points behind, which means if McLaren outscores us by, I think, 5 or 6 points, they will be crowned after Baku with 7 races and 3 sprints, 10 racing sessions to go, Constructors Champion. So definitely it's not going to go to Abu Dhabi. And yeah, you know, I think after the Italian Grand Prix, I thought that was our last chance, you know, to make any inroads. And I think we can say that, you know, we are probably destined to finish second again. Third, Mercedes, 260 points, as you can see over here. So, you know, we have a good 20 points buffer. And hopefully, you know, with the 2 races, as you can see on the lovely calendar there to my right, with Baku and Singapore, where I believe we will definitely be in a contention for a victory. You know, we will, you know, make sure that that second place is ours. Fourth, Red Bull Racing, 239 points, still holding on the hope of, you know, maybe clawing the third place from Mercedes, but that's unlikely to happen just with 1 car. Fifth, Williams, 86 points. Sixth is Aston Martin, 62 points, despite not having a single driver once again in the top 10. Seventh, Racing Bull, 61 points. 8, Kick Sauber, 55 points. Haas is on the 9th position, 44 points. 10, Alpine, 20 points. So this is how it looks like. You know, the Constructors' Championship, which, you know, will probably be decided very, very soon. And this was the Drivers' Championship, and this is how the race finished. With Verstappen taking the third race victory of the season. Yeah, that's definitely disappointing. But, you know, yeah. Sometimes, you know, in adversity, what you have to do is, you know, you have to look forward, right? You know, what I see as obviously the Ferrari's biggest fan, the biggest tifosi, is that, you know, there's gonna be, you know, 2 races, you know, the 2 street circuits. You know, Leclerc, you know, has obviously, you know, managed to, you know, do really well there. You know, Hamilton also as well. So I think we are on an upward trajectory. It's great to see us finishing in a good, healthy positions, but this is not what we were looking for. Obviously, we expected at least a podium. We were definitely in fight, you know, for a victory, but, you know, with relatively lackluster qualifying and, you know, pretty much fighting with the wrong guys at the start, and, you know, without any safety car, without any weather. It was a beautiful day, but, you know, it also sometimes makes for a straightforward race. You know, what a pity. Should have really set the car a little bit better to give, you know, a bit more of a performance to Charles and to Lewis, so that, you know, they would be able, you know, to fight for the victory like we've always been in a ground effect era. And yeah, it's disappointing, you know, but hey, there is a 1/3 of the season to go. You know, still there are 30 racing sessions, and obviously, you know, we are going to go, you know, for the 11 more. So there's lots of racing, you know, to be had, you know, in the final 3 months of the season. And you know, let's end it on a high. Let's enjoy it. You know, I cannot wait for the first Ferrari victory. I hope you enjoyed this, you know, the favorite podium of the year. And speaking, you know, of the trophy, so you could probably notice, right, that it was kind of like, what creature was that, right? You know, design obviously the shiny golden silver. You know, we're not sure exactly what the material was, but basically, you know, it symbolizes, you know, the fastest creatures, you know, on both the, you know, the land, the sea, and of course the air, given obviously, you know, to the fastest driver, because, you know, now we have the new records for the fastest, you know, ever race around Monza, you know, for the fastest ever, you know, fastest lap, right, around Monza, and of course for the ultimate, you know, best fastest lap in the Formula 1 history. So, you know, hope you enjoy, you know, the history in the making. You know, I believe it should have belonged to us, the Scuderia Ferrari. Didn't happen this time, but we will be back next year, right? Of course. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this special race reaction from yeah, the Smalling Sun champion, Ferrari's biggest fan, and Ferrari's fastest driver, who almost always wins here at Monza. You guys, you know, definitely support our challenge, because if you cannot win in the real life, you can always, make your own destiny. So let's be doing that, right? So again, thank you for watching, thank you for your support, and as the true tifosi, let's celebrate, let's sing the Italian anthem even though we haven't won, because we will be winning again, and getting all of the golden shiny medals and golden Formula 1 Grand Prix winner trophies. Let's go!